Hello, everybody, and welcome this morning. I'm very excited. I've got Chris Jones with us today, and we are going to be discussing, is being a landlord the worst possible thing you can do? Is our tenants the worst thing that you can go for your property strategy? And we are going to really find out with the renters, what was the Renters Reform Bill, now the Renters Rights Bill. I know we're going to come on to that. Even the wording slightly puts a chill through us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to have Chris here with us. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi, Emma. Yeah, really good. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. So Chris runs a residential lettings agency called Jones & Co. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, but that's based in Norfolk. He has a big portfolio that he manages, 250 houses, and lots of those are also HMOs. So you can imagine the number of tenants that Chris talks about or talks with every single day. So he's got so much knowledge to share with us. So Chris, tell us just a little bit, a quick intro to yourself for anyone who doesn't know about you and then we'll jump right into your kind of background and how you got to this stage.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Emma. So in a nutshell, I came from the corporate world, like many people do. So I did SEMA accountancy exams, then qualified as an accountant and did 20 years in the industry. Ended up being a financial and operations controller in Norwich. So really enjoyed the career. Alongside that, I was a landlord for quite a long time and thought it was a wise decision at some stage to go self-employed. So we started Jones & Co Lettings, partly to manage our own portfolio, but to offer, a robust letting service to friends that I know who invest and in the wider community. So we did that, had reasonable success with it. It took me about 4 years to get out of my corporate job. And then, so the following 6 years, we managed to get a portfolio, like you say, under management of 250 houses, most of which are student HMOs and professional HMOs in Norwich. And that's what we do. So we help landlords manage their properties for them.
Amazing. So that is, I can't even, it makes me feel slightly unwell managing so many people. I mean, I've got a hotel, so obviously we don't manage tenants really at all. I do have tenants, but it's all about guests for me. So I am literally just buying a 9-bed HMO. So I'm really excited to chat to you because obviously I'm going to have some tenants. In fact, in the next few weeks, I'm going to have more tenants. And so it'll be great to chat to you. But let's just take it back a bit, Chris. It's always really interesting to hear how people got to where they are now. And what I'm really excited about chatting to you is a lot of letting agents come from a letting agent's perspective. So they maybe, I don't know, finish school and decide what job can I do? I quite like property. Maybe I'll join an estate agency. I'm not, that might be the route. But you came from a very different angle. And that really excites me because I do find, and I don't want to, cast aspersions here, but I don't always find that letting agents and estate agents put their clients, which are the landlords, first. It's not always looking at it from our perspective. And it can sometimes, not be there. So let's go back. How did you sort of start out? How did you get into property? So I know you sort of mentioned that, it took you 4 years, but let's go a bit more into sort of what interested you in property to start with.
If I kind of go right back to the start, my parents moved houses, I think 11 times by the time I was 15. So they weren't investors, they moved houses because of jobs. So moving a house, buying and selling a house wasn't something I was particularly daunted by. And the mantra from a lot of parents of getting on the housing ladder, you must get on the housing ladder. So that was pretty much all I knew about it. So I pretty much obeyed my parents. So get on the housing ladder. So I did that. But then 2 years after I bought my first house, which was a 1-bed flat in Didcot. So I'm not sure if you know Didcot, but it's Oxfordshire. Not a pretty town, ultimately, but it's all I could afford on a 100% mortgage, which was great. But 2 years later, it was worth £40,000 more than I bought it for. So I bought it for 65 and it was £104,000, and I sold it. I probably should have kept it, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. And that was the moment that, wow, I've just done, GCSEs, A-levels, degree, professional qualifications, and by deciding to buy a house because my mum told me to, I've made £40,000. So my instinct was sell it and bank it, and that was the wrong instinct, really. But yeah, it was a bit of an eye opener, really. By just making a decision and buying a house, the market was timed right, blah blah blah, but it was a very easy choice, really. So I thought that was something worth taking seriously, really. So I sort of looked a bit more into it and found, Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad. That opened up the whole world of assets and liabilities and owning businesses and being an investor, not an employee, all that good stuff. So that kind of sits with you, doesn't it? All that stuff. I liked my job and it paid well, and it was something I enjoyed doing. But I kind of knew I was never going to get financially free or wealthy by working.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was this idea of owning a system is what Robert Kiyosaki said. So, business owner or investor. There's quite a big difference between being a self-employed business owner, which I am today, to investing in business that the systems run for me. We're not at that point yet, but the ambition is to get to that point where we own the business of a set of systems that then that generates income.
Amazing. So with that kind of view in mind, I'm always kind of interested. So I deal with I've dealt with a fair few letting agents over time. And even recently, for instance, I've done a rent to buy on one of our buy-to-let properties.
Yeah.
And I tried to do it by myself. You know what it's like, Chris. You think, yeah, I'll do it by myself. It'll be fine. And then it was like, I now need to drive over and show the people round, and I need to do all these checks. And it was just like, can't do it. So I spoke to my sort of normal kind of go-to letting agent. And they were like, oh, no, that's not really for us. Didn't really understand it. Spoke to another kind of what I would call not dissimilar in size, but really hungry. And they're really we're really excited about learning this kind of new, different strategy. So I kind of really saw a very sort of different picture. But from your perspective, coming from an investment background, do you see any kind of clear differences between investor background letting agents and perhaps letting agents that have just come in at it from the opposite way?
I guess I know other letting agents in the area. I think letting agents kind of fall into a few categories for me, not necessarily where they came from, but maybe the size. So the big sort of national agencies is the Sequences of the world. And then the sort of the regional players in Norfolk, that's like Pim & Co. or Alexander & Co. or Abbott Fox and or the smaller independents. And I think there's a whole those. And I think that really who would you like to deal with? And they all offer something. Letting agency versus investor background, not as much experience at it, I guess. I quite like the idea that I can relate to a landlord because I'm a landlord as well. So I like that. So that helps me have a good conversation with a landlord. But ultimately, I think the team and the company needs to have that conversation on my behalf is the truth. But we speak every day so that they know my view on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it is really key, isn't it? Knowing that you've got somebody who, so for instance, when you're looking for, an accountant, if they've got property, it gives you more confidence in knowing that they're going to do it, like a conveyancer. Yeah. If they own their own properties, they have that background, and you could really relate that with them. So yeah, I absolutely love that. So guys, we've got quite a few people jumping on now. Can you let us know where you are listening from? And it will give us an idea where you are in the UK. We do have some international people as well. So please, do let us know. So you basically, you have, so you bought your own properties. Was it kind of chicken and egg? Did you set up the letting agent first and buy properties, or did you do it the other way?
Yeah, the other way around entirely. I think when I first started, I got a great idea. Let's buy some properties, let them inflate, maybe pull some out, and then go again and just sit on them and do nothing, and be very, slightly more passive and I'll just have a good career in the meantime. That'd be fine. And then I got itchy feet and stuff like that. So the idea of owning a business that cash flows is kind of really important to supplement investments. But it's been way more challenging than I would have guessed. Enjoyable, You know, loads of personal development going on, etc. Easy is not what it's been, and it's been very hands-on. So the property investing has definitely taken a side kind of step, really, while I focus on the lettings business and all that goes on with that: people, systems, process, customers, cash, etc. But that's kind of what I wanted to do. So that's.
Oh, we have just lost Chris. Let's just get him back in again. Sorry.
Oops.
That's all right. Sorry, you popped out again, but I didn't actually lose you this time. I think that's what happened last time. You are actually just sat in there. So brilliant. We've got some people around the country. Let us know if you we're listening where you are calling from or listening from. So so you started doing this. Now I know that I'm a huge advocate of learning, educating myself, you know, probably similar to you, got millions of books and listen to podcasts and all of those kind of things. Tell us about your kind of education side of things, and I believe now you even lead a networking event as well.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the education bit is kind of, I guess, a thread. So the idea of books, there's some key books that I've read. Rich Dad Poor Dad's probably the standout one for me, and it feels like I've invested in the education more recently, more heavily. So my biggest has been a 12-month letting agency development course with Sally Lawson. So Sally used to be the ALA president, and so she has agencies, and she also has an agency training company. So I joined that and had massive amount of value from that course, and still think about it, you know, every day about things that, you know, what a Sally should do. So that's one element of training. Being involved in PIN, not necessarily from a training perspective, from a support networking and networking perspective. I can't see myself not going to PIN, Property Investors Network. Super supportive environment. I recommend any, you know, landlord or investor at any stage they only come along and have a look at it. So there's that. But I more recently invested in a coach. So about 9 months ago, I started. And again, why would I ever stop that? Because the thought process around learning development and mindset, I don't feel like I can do it justice doing it by myself. So having these sort of elements of coaching and training and support around me is really important.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that one. I think, you know, there really isn't anyone who's mega successful who hasn't had some kind of mentor coach. They may change over time, they may remain the same. Things like masterminding as well. I'm a huge fan of that. I've got multiple kind of mastermind groups, you know, whether it's property people or business people. It's just, you know, it is invaluable, isn't it? And so, just, so it's at the Norfolk PIN meeting that you host?
Yeah.
And how's that?
Yeah, Norwich. Yeah.
Norwich, sorry. We seem to have a bit of double. Are you hearing double or not?
I'm okay at the minute.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so tell us how that's helped you. Anyone who may be new and doesn't do a lot of networking, you know, what would you say to them around, you know, going to networking events, you know, specifically PIN ones?
My first thought is you can always get your question answered. If it's not directly, it'll be indirectly from someone who knows someone else. And I think hanging on question is something that I've been guilty of in the past, and you lose property deals because of that. So I would always encourage people to make use of the support group. That people are there to support themselves, but also support each other. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is not making use of that. People want to give you help. They do want to give you help. All you have to do is ask for it, and they'll happily chat to you about your issues, problems, concerns. So like that, particularly in property where it can be lonely, some big decisions have to be made by yourself. You know, do I buy this? Do I refurb this? And they're not options. But having someone you can pick up the phone to and go, just check me on this, or so I think that's for me the power of it, and I feel supported in that place, you know. So I like being allowed to do it.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and absolutely, you know, that kind of feeling a bit lonely, especially if, you know, your friends and family aren't so much into property. They are often, you know, have your best interests at heart, perhaps, but because they don't understand what you're doing, they cannot necessarily be as supportive. Some are and some aren't. And I remember when I went into, it was Eastbourne actually, I went into an Eastbourne pin, and I just remember thinking, wow, I feel really like I found my tribe here. Everyone was talking, they were really positive about the industry. They were all doing amazing things. And I was just kind of like, wow, these people are amazing. I want to spend more time with them. And that's been literally the same ever since.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's been, I think if you can find your tribe, it's a really special thing. So let's
agree.
Move on then. So you have got obviously now this kind of lettings agent, and just tell us about just for background for people, what are the properties that you look after?
So we started off managing. Our first property was a 3-bed HMO. It was an investor in the PIN meeting that says, yes, you can manage my property. And Thomasina is still a landlady client today and a friend. So that's really great news. But we started taking on properties like that. So student HMOs was kind of where we started. And then we obviously take on professional HMOs. So that's kind of what we're known for. We definitely manage, you know, single family homes as well. I think the HMO thing kind of stood us in good stead, because the level of communication and the level of certification, it's all, there's more to do, more communication, more payments, more maintenance, more certificates, So there's managing a HMO is, you know, if you can do that, you can manage other properties as well.
Okay, so you're not scaring me off, are you, when I'm buying my HMO?
No, it's great. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's nothing to be scared of particularly. I think as long as you're okay with the process, and, you know, certificates is the main thing. Are you certificated? Yes. Do I know how to speak to my tenants? Can they speak to me? Yes. You know, being fair and open, and that it does take time though, which is probably a consideration. Managing a HMO is definitely not passive. You know, it's not a passive property investment.
No, absolutely. And I think it's you know, it's so important to understand that you are offering a service. It is a business, isn't it? So if you choose to manage it yourself, then, you know, you need to be knowledgeable. You need to have it. You know, there's no excuses for not knowing what you don't know, basically, with those kind of things. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of having other people do the things that they're experts in.
Yeah.
So, as I said, when I tried to find, you know, a tenant for my rent to buy, like, it wasn't my forte. It wasn't something that I was really good at. And I very quickly just thought, what are you doing? Like, really, you just, and in fact, from that, it's meant that I've kept on that letting agent. And she now every year is, we've got an agreement where she comes and just makes sure that we've got everything in place. If anything has changed, if there are new things, because that just makes me feel more comfortable. And obviously my tenant, I want to ensure that we offer the best for them too.
Yes.
So, you know, there's always kind of that third party if we need as well. So, yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there has been so much in the press recently. And it's been kind of building up over many years about, you know, there's terrible landlords out there. Equally, there's terrible tenants. And, you know, there's been things like, you know, buy-to-lets are dead. You know, there's quite some extreme press things, which, let's be fair, I don't really listen to the press because they're not necessarily, they're quite sensationalized, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you are managing 250 houses. Of those, it sounds like a very large proportion are houses of multiple occupation. So you've got, I would imagine, a minimum of 4 or 5 people in each one, and some of them are going to be bigger. Are you feeling that? Do you think, you know, that there shouldn't be landlords anymore? Should we let the big boys, should we let the banks do all the management of this? Where are you at on your thoughts?
So the private rented sector offers an invaluable service that cannot be replaced. So there's just no way that's going to happen. Now there might be an edging towards big corporate, sort of funds and that type of management, but the truth is that the reality today is that's not the case. So the UK economy, tenants, government, etc., need the private rented sector. So be happy that you provided a valuable service to the country and your tenants more specifically. So that's broadly, it is where it is. That's where it's going to be. So if you look at what Sally said, I remember a few years ago, and it sort of still resonates. Sally Lawson was the home ownership in the UK is higher than the rest of Europe, and which way do you think we're going to go in home ownership and the balance of tenants and home ownership? So it's likely that the rental market, private rental sector, will get bigger, a lot bigger, in the years and decades to come. So I think we're in a growing market. We will continue to provide a valuable service to tenants in the country. So I think that's going. The fundamentals aren't changing for me.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. We've never been. We're in basically a small island, and it's not getting any bigger. I mean, not that I've seen. It's not like Dubai where they're actually growing out into the sea, are they? We're a little island, and we've got a lot of people. So historically, we've always had lots of people coming in and some people coming out, and it's growing and growing. The number of people living here. So we've got to have more houses, and as you're seeing as well, a lot of the single houses are now being split up into even smaller places, like these one beds for HMOs. So I'm completely with you. I see it as something that's really growing. But equally, I feel that a lot of this kind of, so we're going to go on and talk about these, the acts that are coming through. Yeah. But it just doesn't seem kind of right. So a lot of things that are coming in, when you look at some of the rulings that have come in over the last couple of years, all that's happened is the rents that your average tenant is paying are just massively increasing.
Yeah.
It doesn't really seem to be kind of answering or reflecting what perhaps the governments are wanting. And I do not want to get into any kind of politics, but the more pressure you're putting on the landlords, it seems that therefore you're seeing more rents, and actually that's not a good thing for the tenants. It seems a bit of a shame. So so I just wanted to just understand. So anyone who is listening, we've lost Chris again, he's popped out again. Anyone who is listening, do you currently have tenants? If you have tenants, please put a 1 in the chat. And if you don't have tenants, perhaps you don't have a property or you have guests, put a 0, and that will give us a bit of an idea where we're at there. So obviously we had this renters reform bill that the Conservatives were creating, and they got really far along, hadn't they? We all thought that this was it, and this was going on. And then suddenly we obviously have a new government coming in, and it's changed from renters reform. Sounds, things need to be changed, to renters' rights. It's quite different terminology, isn't it? How are you feeling about that kind of terminology there?
How do I feel about the terminology? So I think my job as an agent is to understand what's being said and how it might impact a landlord and tenant. And I think it's about knowledge, knowledge and all that kind of stuff. For me, the fundamentals haven't changed and won't change. You still have to provide a good house, good value, and the tenant has to do some things like pay rent and report maintenance. So fundamentally, it's not changed. Fundamentally, properties go up in value, just because of inflation. That's what happens. Inflation means that things go up, and if you're in an asset that inflates, then that's kind of fine, and that's good. There is a balance, I think, that's shifting, and I think this is about what investment class do you want to invest in. This isn't if you're okay with the responsibilities you take on as a landlord, either in the past or going forward in the future. If you're okay with it, you're okay with it, and those responsibilities may have a slight twist on them, but ultimately you are responsible for quite a lot as a landlord. You know, the habitability of your house, the structure, and good, all that good stuff. So I think if your investment class is property, that is what comes with owning property, is a massive, you know, responsibility to your tenants. I think if you're comfortable with that, then that's fine. Just understand where you're at with it. If you're not, then there are other things you can invest in, like, you know, stock shares and more passive things. So I think we can go into sort of the nuances maybe, but I think broadly speaking, legislation will always change. And it's part of the market, and property you've got to be super sort of versatile with it as well, I think. So when you bought a property 15, 20 years ago, it was different. And when you buy one in the next 10, 15 years, it'll be different again. So just understanding what market you're operating in is really important. Not being scared of legislation, but just understanding what it might mean. Hopefully that wasn't too wafty. But
no, I really like that. And I think that was one thing when we spoke about networking is at that time, I remember, you know, attending a few what I would call property networking events. And everyone just seemed very kind of positive and solution focused. It was kind of like, okay, well, this is, you know, this is clearly an issue, but what can we do to work around it? And that's, you know, that's certainly what I see. I think change is inevitable,
yeah,
isn't it? And it's just how we react to that.
Yeah.
Exactly, going back to what you said, if you are running a property business, you know, and you're offering these, you know, as you mentioned, you know, a really good home, very good value, all of these things, and you're doing it in a correct, compliant way, then that should be good. There are going to be, you know, the odd, you know, rogue landlord, but equally there's going to be some rogue tenants as well. And it's ensuring that we keep those thoughts in reality, because it would sound like, you know, every tenant's really bad, equally every landlord's really bad, and that's just not true.
No, and the sort of the economics of a rental kind of is that we haven't got, like you said before, we haven't got enough properties in the UK to kind of service it. So if you put a decent property on the market, it will get oversubscribed by inquiries and applications. That's quite a good place to be if you're providing a service into that market. That's quite a nice place to be. No, there'd be a rental limit you can hit. There's a value equation you've got to be aware of, and you know your competition is the landlord next door. But if you know all of those things, you've got, you know, it's a pretty strong market out there. There shouldn't be really a need for voids. You know, buying well is really important, and you know, tenant relationships really important. So your agent is definitely part of that. But the agent does act on the instructions of the landlord. So you have a very strong influence about how your tenant views you and your product.
I think that's a really, I really love the way you brought that up, because that's something always to be aware of, isn't it? If you've got a problem, so if you've got a void, it's kind of actually looking and taking a step back and thinking, well, why is that? Is my product, my property, is it not good enough? Or whatever, is my letting agent, are they, not working with me? Am I not doing things? Whatever it might be. So it sounds like if you have currently a problem, it's worth taking a few steps back. We're in a market where actually you should be running a really sort of healthy business.
Yeah. So, I think there's a difference in between, like, an investment, which property is, but property is a different type of investment. It's offering a product and a service, ultimately. And I think if you invest in stocks and shares, that's not doing that. That is just buying an asset with no responsibility at all. So I think property is not the same as stocks and shares. It's very, very different. You are in a marketplace, you have a product, you've got to market it well, you've got to service it, and you have responsibilities and liabilities. And I think that's quite a different set of things to consider when buying a property, because you don't go into it for the joy of speaking to tenants. You don't, but that is something that you have to be comfortable with. Yeah, absolutely.
So this renters' rights bill, then, it does feel like it is giving tenants much more protection. So obviously, what do you see as kind of the key changes that might affect, current buy-to-let landlords? Yeah. And is there a way that you feel they can sort of prepare for these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big two are the abolition of Section 21, sort of no fault eviction, and then the other one is the every tenancy starts as a periodic tenancy. And that kind of doesn't feel great. So if you sort of like, what feelings that conjure up, I can't get rid of my tenant, section 21. That's true, that mechanism won't exist. Okay. So, but it's being replaced by something else or strengthened. So section 8 process is still there. So why would I want my house back? Okay. So the section 8 process does allow you to have your house back for reasons that you can, you want to sell, you want to move back into it, antisocial behavior, blah, blah, blah. Lots of reasons you might want to have your house back, all of which are catered for in section 8 process. So that's fine. It's just that the mechanism is changed. You need to give a reason for it and demonstrate the reason for it. You can't just say, please leave, and then they can leave. So it does make it harder. Is it harder? Is that the right question? It just changes the process, really. But you can get your house back, is the point.
And inherently, I think we have to go back to the reason why people would buy a property is if you're buying a buy-to-let property, you want a tenant to be in there, don't you? You want it to be paying. Yeah. You want them to be happy. You want them to be doing it. So inherently, and as long as you can ensure that it's kept in good condition, and you can also ensure that the condition of it is kind of upheld, then that is actually what you want to do. So yeah. I think a lot of the times here is that kind of fear again of a bad tenant. So that's where working really hard and understanding your the letting agents and who they are, how they deal with it, what successes they've had, and doing that kind of due diligence, because inherently to get your property back, from what you've described, a section 8, there should be a reason why you want it back. Yeah. But I suppose there is that kind of fear. So inherently it's again just going back to the due diligence on the tenant, and just making sure that they're going to work for your particular property.
Yeah, I mean, but the situation has changed, so you can't guarantee that your tenant will pay you rent. That's not but there are insurance products that exist exactly because of that. So yeah, you can get insurance products to guard you against that from as little as say £30 a month. So if you've got one property and you rely on the rent to pay the mortgage, which is the case in a lot of instances, and you can't afford to be without that rent, then protect it. There's an insurance product out there for you. So sometimes it's not that tenants don't want to pay, so they can't pay. That might be a. I remember Sally sort of saying that the cost of living crisis was a bigger concern than COVID. During COVID, we were all protected by furloughs and all this kind of stuff. The money was flowing. Cost of living's different. Inflation goes up, bills, rent, etc. We're not protected against, or the UK is not protected as well as that against that. So there was a feeling that puts landlords at risk. I don't think it's had as an effect quite as much as it may have done, but you can protect your portfolio, your properties against the risk of your tenant not paying, assuming they're referenced in the right way. In the first instance, you can get an insurance product against it.
Okay, and that presumably you encourage that in your letting agent. You're very clear that's these are the options to you as a landlord.
Our portfolio landlords tend not to go for it, but our sort of single one or two sort of landlords do, just because the portfolio guys have been there longer, professional sort of landlords, and know that they can afford to, if a rent's not being paid, they can cope with that. But that's not the case for everybody. So I think the rent guarantee sort of insurance is a really good option just to guard against that. What if my tenant doesn't pay?
Yeah, fantastic. And then as far as, ensuring that, each tenant is compliant, do you think there's any kind of changes there to ensure, if you do have a problematic tenant?
In making sure that who's moving into your house, or sort of when they've moved in, what do you do?
Yeah, so basically practical steps to ensure that, during these changes that they remain compliant.
I think it's mainly on the sort of the start of the tenancy type of changes. So the section 21, that's ending the tenancy. The initial 6-month term that's can be a worry, particularly for student landlords. But by default, I think the most recent version of legislation suggests that the tenant can't give notice in the first 4 months, and they must give 2 months' notice. So even though the tenancy is periodic, they won't be able to leave until for 6 months. So it's a period tenancy with the 6 months lead into it. Does that kind of make sense? That it's not a fixed term. It's a different terminology, but it is a 6 month initial period.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in fairness, do you feel this is kind of a ChatGPT question?
Yeah.
But I've seen quite a lot of things where, people have put in the bill, the renters' rights bill into ChatGPT and asked, how can I get around it from a tenant's perspective? And there's some pretty scary things that crop up. But and correct me if I'm wrong, but my view was majority of tenants want to live in a nice house, they want to pay their rent, and they want to do the right things.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine, I mean, they might do it as a bit of a laugh, but I can't imagine that people are going to actively be doing that to cause problems.
To get out of the tenancy?
Yes.
No, nor do I, because there'll be a reason for it. There'll be a reason for it. And if they want to sort of, change jobs, all that kind of stuff, that's kind of fine, but there's still a notice period. I think we wouldn't recommend a landlord sign more than, we normally recommend a landlord sign 6 months at initial anyway, because you want to see how you get on with the tenant, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe extend, 12 months at a time. So the 12-month thing, it's all by negotiation anyway. So dear tenant, you're coming to the end of your tenancy agreement. The landlord would like for you to sign for another 12 months. No, thanks, because I don't know where I'll be in 12 months. So there's still a negotiation at that point. But no, you can't sign for 12 months. It'll be sort of rolling periodic. But I think, like you say, if you offer a valuable product, I think there's no reason you should be scared of re-advertising your property, because it should be rentable. Ultimately, it should provide value.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these things also, it's running your business correctly. So, for instance, you should be putting aside every month, a proportion of that to go to renovations and refurbs. Because obviously over time, so it's a bit like, even in a kind of an everyday business, not just property, if you've bought something to then sell something, you want to be putting aside money to cover the purchase of it. And it's exactly the same, isn't it, with property? If you're constantly getting money in and that's working really well for a number of years, that at a certain point you're going to have to invest a bit more money into that. So you should put money aside and all of those kind of things. So it is going back to running a correct business to me, and having
and it feels like, that's quite a hard thing to do, isn't it? I think, because there's no run into, one day you don't own something, then you do, and all of a sudden you expect to do all these things. You have assets, liabilities, you've got income expenses, you've got a fully functioning business, profit and loss balance sheet, all that good stuff on day one. And then putting money aside for contingency, absolutely, that is the right thing to do. We've just sort of started a service in our own agency that some landlords taken advantage of, where we hold some of the rent in our client account on an accrued basis to make sure that they can afford that the boiler when it goes, or the carpets when they need changing and things like that. It's a discipline that, is the right discipline. I think also hard to do sometimes. Yeah,
that's a really good idea, actually. I mean, because everyone thinks, don't they, that they're going to do it themselves, but inherently, and certainly that's what I learned with doing this rent to buy, is that you've got so many people out there who genuinely have, saved up money, and then suddenly maybe their car blew up. Suddenly that, and then suddenly that a big chunk of it's gone. And then, another year goes on, and actually the prices of houses have gone up. So they need an even bigger deposit to get there. So there's always kind of, people have good intentions. So I really like that idea. Was that your idea, or was that kind of an industry thing that's coming in?
We had a chat with one of our our landladies about it, and it was kind of a service that she said, that would work really well. So we started doing it. Yeah.
I like it. Very, very good. So how about rent increases then? So that is genuinely, it can be quite a scary thing. And I think also as a landlord, I know a lot of people that I kind of mentor, they talk about, oh, well, I don't really want to increase the rent, I really like them, the family. And I kind of always remind them that for me, and I don't know where you come from, Chris, but I think it's really important to ensure that you keep the rent as close to market rent as possible, because if something did happen, and let's say something happened and you needed to sell your property, for that person to then suddenly have to find a huge many more £100s to move into a new property is actually really hard. So there is this kind of big thing about sort of rent. So let's cover that one. So do you think it's important to keep the rents at a an amenable level in line with market rents?
I really do. Lots and lots of reasons, really. So like you said, you have got an obligation as a landlord to maintain your house. So how are you going to do that if your rent's low and you can't afford it? So it protects your ability to maintain your house and do the right thing. So that's a angle on it. We've also had situations where we've taken on houses where the rent has been way below market value. We suggested an increase because this is the market, and anyway, the landlord goes for it, puts the rent up, tenant can't afford it, leaves. So not a great position for tenant to be in, and not a great position for landlord to be in because they get a void. So that's another sort of angle on it. And then you touched on the sort of saleability of your house. So we have come across houses and landlords where the rent for their property is low, they want to sell it. It's not a good investment purchase for anyone because the rent is below the market rate. So if an investor's looking at that property, the first thing they're going to do is have to increase the rent for the sitting tenant and risk a void. It's just not an attractive place to be. So it decreases the value of your investment property to the resale market. And if it's not being maintained because you're not the money to do it, a double-edged sword. So I think it's for lots of reasons, put the rent up close to market value. And I think that's where agents kind of come in quite handy because they've got processes that say the rent was increased 12 months ago, the market is now this, I suggest this. And that's just a process that they will just have. You can choose to say yes to that or no to that, or come a bit under their recommendation. But I think self-managing landlords don't do that with quite the rigor that some agents do. Because we're expected to do that. That's part of our service. And that's, really, that alone is a reason to use an agent, because that there'll be a rent review process.
Yeah. So what about if you buy a property, for instance, let's say you buy an HMO and there's some tenants in there and their rents are really low. How would you go about, dealing with that kind of situation?
I think it depends on how you want to deal with it, I suppose. So two options. So the communications and the relationship is always key. So you're not dealing with an asset, you're dealing with a person. So sort of bear that in mind. If you're using an agent, then your agent should be having that conversation, understanding the tenants, where they're at with their finances and that kind of stuff. But you can increase the rent. The landlord is entitled to do that using the correct notice. And the tenant can either say yes or no to that. And if they say no to that, then they might want to leave and all this good stuff. So it does depend a little bit on where you want to take your property. Where do you want it in the market? Because you can sit top, middle, or bottom of any market, and people will have their own views on that. But if they want to make it, boutiquey and top end, you kind of need to do quite a lot of stuff to your property to demand that rent. It's just having in mind, and what I'm talking about these days is a value, not the rental price. That's only one side. What are they buying for that? And it's the value that you're trying to offer. So if you can offer a high price but high value, that's kind of fine. But if you want to be sort of middle or bottom, that's okay too. So I think really about where do you want to sit? I mean, my parents invest in property and they want to sit, top probably 80% kind of thing. Not top, not the top right at the top of the market, but they want to be sort of just above the top, or just the 2 or 3 tiers below that, not the middle. They want to be above the middle, and I think that's quite a nice place to be. But I think it depends on where you want to take your property, really. If it's the rent's not high enough, then I think it should go up ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. And it is so key, but I think there is, an awful lot of fear around, as you've mentioned, this not knowing. You don't know what you don't know, and that's where getting a really good letting agent on board to help you do that, I think is absolutely key. So how about this kind of the thoughts around having the decent home standards, and really having kind of stricter regulations around that? Because again, you could have somebody move in and then they've been there for, let's say, 5 years, and the property that they moved into was really spick and span and beautiful, and then obviously over time things can happen. Where are your thoughts on this element?
So listen to a few webinars and stuff about this one, but from what I understand, the landlord's obligations haven't really changed. It's the mechanism by which they're enforced has changed. So landlords have always had the obligation to keep homes safe, habitable, and structurally well repaired, all that kind of stuff. Like, we've always had that. The decent home standards, I think, was a standard that's used to assess public sector housing that's now been applied to the private sector. So it's just a set of standards that existed that just been applied to us. Fundamentally, it's not changed. You still need to provide a good accommodation. I think that's partly. And if a landlord starts to say, well, do I really need to do that, or should I read? I think that question rings alarm bells, because what about the you're providing in that? Remember that value equation we kind of talked about, so unfortunately, there's never quite clear cut. Do I absolutely need? Will those carpets go 1 more year? That is a judgment call, isn't it? Do you want them to go 1 more year, or do you want to pay £300 to change that carpet? That's probably the where I kind of see the conversations, the value of the conversation. Of course, you don't have to change your carpet, but you probably should, because you kind of want to. Because if you wouldn't live there, then you kind of should.
Yeah, definitely. And but equally, it is a difficult one, isn't it? As you said, you have different types of landlords. You have perhaps a landlord that's literally got 1 or 2 properties, and that's paying for their mortgage, compared to the portfolio landlords. And again, it goes back to attempting to run it in a proper way and being led and directed by somebody like you, who can offer, which I thought was great, a contingency to hold funds in there. So I mean, again, inherently it goes back to the point of knowing that as long as you're offering a great product, you're going to be absolutely fine. But then you've got I suppose the other one, which something like mold is a really big one, isn't it? Because
it is.
They're rating the property. You may be putting wet washing everywhere and all of those kind of things. So what kind of issue do you spend a lot of time educating the tenant? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, it's a great one. It's so with a lot of student properties. So nature of a HMO, some of the houses, weren't designed to be HMOs, but then I got 6 people in them. So all having, a shower every day and cooking 6 lots of whatever. So there's way more moisture in the houses that are ever intended to be. So there's more condensation and there's more, perhaps more mold because of that. In my mind, there's two things to mold. Is it landlord or tenant responsibility? And if it comes outside in, it's always landlord, because it's that's the structure of the house. If it's inside out, that tends to be ventilation and heating. So there is a lot of education that comes along with it. In my mind, that if it's condensation related, because moisture in the air goes to a cold wall, it will condense and it will stay wet. And if it's ventilated and heated, it will also dry. That will be fine. If it's not ventilated and heat or it's behind a sofa or behind something against the wall, there's no airflow, there's a chance that might appear in mold. For me, that's a kind of a care that something the tenant can control. Within 2 sprays, you can kill mold and it's all sorted. And then there's don't put things against cold walls, ventilate every day, and perhaps don't use the don't dry clothes inside, so keep the moisture down. So there's a whole load of education around that, I think.
Wow, so it is a big thing, isn't it? Because you can imagine, I remember when I was a student, student lets are not like they were in my day. I mean, they were absolutely horrific. I can't believe my son's currently away at college and his room is like, wow. I mean, in fact, it's nicer than his own room.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it is a challenging thing, isn't it? Because people live their lives in different ways and they don't always want to do the things that might help the property, and then you get the results of that. But it's still a challenge, isn't it, for them to understand this is your issue, this is your fault, and then if they don't do something, it really can then affect the house and the upkeep of it.
It can, and there's always an underlying relationship thing that's going on here, because even though a tenancy agreement or a law or whatever says one thing, that doesn't preclude you still have a relationship with the person you're talking to, that you really want to keep that relationship as good as it possibly can be, at the same time as being clear about responsibilities. I think that's something we struggle with. I think is the idea of a tenancy agreement is living in a property, and you have the responsibility to care for that property. A hotel is not that. So I reckon there's a slight blur, and student accommodation, because it's by nature, it's a 1-year contract. It's my home for a very short time. It's not my 5-year home sort of thing. So my propensity to want to care for that property is a little bit less, but the obligations are still the same, even though it's a year, maybe 10, 11 months. So it's a bit of a, it's a different agreement, isn't it? A tenancy agreement versus a hotel or a short stay. There is obligations of the tenant as well.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a lot of juggling. I'm just trying to imagine chatting to a load of having got two students myself in the house of that age, knowing what they're like. It looks interesting. So I'm just aware of time now. We're coming to the end, but so are you seeing, or do you foresee a kind of shift in the type of landlords that are entering the market? So obviously we talked about having that one or two properties, or are you really seeing sort of more larger scale investors wanting to come in?
I think it's hard to comment on the whole market, but most of our properties are owned by investment landlords. Is the truth. We had the portfolio that we acquired about a year ago was more on the 1 and 2 properties, and it's very different outlooks. It's a different conversation to have with that landlord than an investment landlord. In terms of where the markets go, I don't know. It feels like it's probably going. The number of properties per landlord is probably going to increase over time. I would suggest, but people still do want to buy properties and invest in them. I think for the right reasons, because it's a good place to put your money, and bricks and mortar is something the UK like investing in, and indeed international like investing in UK property as well. But I think the fundamentals are still very strong in property, because there's a shortage of it. There's an inflationary pressure on property, and those two things will make for good investments, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually it's not necessarily a reflection on the market always. There's obviously a huge push now of education around property investing. So therefore, whereas the olden days, you maybe made a bit of money and you'd be thinking, oh, what am I going to do with that money? Oh, we'll pop it into a property. Now there's so much more professionalism. There's so much more knowledge. You might suddenly see somebody up the road who seems to suddenly be growing the portfolio. How did you do that? Oh, I went to a networking meeting, and then I actually decided to do a course.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's not necessarily a reflection on the the Renters' Right bill. I actually think there's just so many more things reflecting that, and certainly for me, when you look at the number of people who would have had no thought in the past of coming in and investing in property, they're suddenly seeing ways that you can actually come into property through. I know you've mentioned that you do sourcing now within your business and all of that, and that these are really interesting ways of coming into this property environment without having this huge 25% deposit or whatever.
So much of that, isn't there? I think it's coming onto these networking meetings does open your eyes, because they to invest in property, you've got a lot of money, right? But then it doesn't have to be your money, etc., etc. So using other people's is quite a weird concept, but that is absolutely the way the great investors do it. So having those thoughts in your mind about how can I create wealth, create a good product, and all this kind of stuff. It's a much wider topic than just owning a building, which is great. I love having those types of conversations.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds, if we were to conclude on this, that obviously you have a big letting agent. You certainly do not feel it, and you've talked about the fact that you're expanding and growing, that there is still massive opportunities for landlords and for buying property in our little island in the UK.
Yeah, and absolutely. So, the fundamentals are great. They're sound. You've got to be aware of what the market you're going into, and are you up for that? Because responsibilities come with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you so much, Chris. This has been really interesting. So obviously, I know you do a number of things. So would you mind just sort of giving us a bit of information on where people can perhaps come and find you, what you offer within your business, and if people are interested, what can they come to do with you?
Yeah, thank you very much. So our website is jonesandco.co.uk. We're a letting agency primarily. We started in Norfolk, Norwich, and we now obviously offer the ability to sell houses for investors or homeowners, and obviously a sourcing product. We've got acquisition manager Ollie who does the sourcing, and a sales manager Philippa who sells houses. So as well as letting them, we can sort of buy them and sell them for you as well. So the conversation I really like having is the why would I bother buying investing in property, and it's that type of conversation I quite like having, because not doing it is often more risky than doing it.
Yeah, definitely, because we certainly don't. It's frightening when you actually hear people have got huge amounts of money sat in the bank. And as we know, actually, especially in big inflationary times, you're in a great position if you've got a mortgage on your property, because it's actually it's shrinking that mortgage, so to speak. A really good way. Amazing. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I've learned lots today, and I'm looking forward to my 9 more tenants that are going to be arriving.
I'm sure that'll be great. When is that happening?
So we should exchange and complete around the 11th, so not that far away now.
Okay, brilliant.
Very, very, very imminent. So and having been used to guests where they don't have rights in the same way, it is it's a good thing. But I wanted to move into that, as with the strategies. It's great to have. I think service accommodation is a bit more of a high risk. And HMO is
a bit more predictable, I'd say.
A bit more predictable, yeah. Not necessarily, it's got its risks, absolutely. Yeah. So that's what we wanted to move across with. So brilliant. Excellent. So Chris, if I may ask, if that's okay, to have a final word from you before we say goodbye.
Oh, final word. What's my final word? Keep your mind open about the idea of investing in property. I think the fundamentals are great. I believe having a good agent or people and support network around you is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely concur with that. Brilliant, guys. So I will be back again next Monday. So do come and join us then. And again, Chris, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today and sharing incredible information. We really appreciate that. And we will be putting the link to Chris's website in the comments underneath, so that you can come and find him as well.